Okay, so we're recording. Sam, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody?
Hi, my name is Sam Dehghani. I'm a Pitzer alum, class of '95. And I just wanted to sort of give a very sort of speedy biography because every good story is, has a character introduction. That's how every screenplay begins. So I just wanted to sort of run through very briefly how I got into this to begin with. I went to an all-boys Catholic school, and I didn't really know what I wanted to be, but I took a lot of art courses in high school. And when I got to Pitzer, I kind of did art as like a minor, and then I like sophomore year, I decided to do English and history. And I didn't really know I had no plans sort of with what I wanted to do after college. But like I said, I took a lot of art courses. And one day my art professor took me aside and said, Sam, there's a lot to art than just drawing and painting. And he recommended that I take a theater course at Pomona. And I did, and it changed my entire life, basically. It was one of those eureka moments where I realized this is what I wanted to do all along. I didn't know sort of where art fit in, because I was good with ideas, but I wasn't good with sort of painting and drawing. So that kind of, that class at Pomona, that theater class kind of, changed my whole perspective. And by the time I was a senior, I was like, well, that's what I want to do with my life. I want to become a filmmaker. And so after graduation, I actually went and I interned for this UPM who was now trying to produce his own movies. A UPM is, I think you guys know, a unit production manager. They have them on big movies. They oversee the entire production with the line producer. Because a producer is usually never on the set. A UPM manages the entire set, the schedule, make sure that they cross the finish line. And this person, Mo Laspinoso, he was a UPM on really big studio pictures. And his mentor was Fred Caruso, who was the UPM on The Godfather. So I was really excited to get the internship. And it was great because they had me read a lot of scripts, and they had me sort of go on a lot of runs and meet a lot of people. But then my mom was telling me, like, why don't you go to film school? And I didn't really think about film school. I thought, well, no, why not just get an internship, to start to develop relationships, work in the industry, and then kind of work my way to becoming a filmmaker that way. But I ended up going to film school, Chapman University, and right away, with the way that the film school was structured, it was mostly about getting us acquainted with how to shoot. It was broken up into sort of a production class, a cinematography class, an intro to screenwriting class, an editing class. And it was really sort of just an introduction, really. There wasn't much in terms of really getting deep into screenwriting. But of course, because I was so sort of obsessed with film, I did really well in film school. All my screenings went really well, but I didn't really have a foundation in screenwriting because, like I said, there was only 2 screenwriting courses. It's changed now. You can't take just a screenwriting discipline. However, I will get back to this later as we do the Q&A. I'm not sure that that's the best approach to screenwriting. Sitting in a class and having an instructor tell you sort of guidelines about cinematic screenwriting. But anyway, I, made my thesis. I played at a few festivals, and then I graduated. And, back then everyone thought you make it short, it goes to a festival, and then you start making features. That's what everybody thought, but that is not how it works at all. That's not how it works at all. Really, for me, the beginning of my film career or film study really happened after I graduated from film school, because I realized that film school didn't prepare me at all to gain entry into the industry. Like I said, it's a great place to go and practice, but I would advise strongly, if you are someone that needs to take out a student loan to go to film school, I'll get into why I think there's a better way, there's a better approach. Really, what I want this to be about is sort of me telling you what pitfalls to avoid, because I've gone through sort of the trials and tribulations of trying to make it as a screenwriter. And if I had to go back and do it again, I didn't have anybody tell me, don't do this, don't do that, do this, do this. I really didn't have anybody to sort of, guide me through the process of how best to really make it, because it's very, very difficult and very challenging. And it has nothing to do with talent, unfortunately. So, I mean, you do need to be talented, but I think a lot of that just comes from work. If you put the work in, you'll exhibit talent. It's just repetition. It's, especially with screenwriting. But so I spent the next 20 years really learning how to the craft of screenwriting. Like everybody else, I started with screenwriting books, and took a few seminars, because you won't believe this, but there's an entire industry around Hollywood that basically, I don't want to use I'm going to use the word prey, but preys on people that want the answers, that want give me what I need to know to be able to make it as a screenwriter or a director. Mostly screenwriting, because it's almost impossible to break into Hollywood as a director. It very rarely happens if you don't write a script first. That's what gets you a directing job. Not even the first time. Maybe you have to write 2 or 3 features, and if they do well, then someone will give you the chance to actually direct a project, because it'll exhibit that you know something about storytelling, cinema storytelling. But what I discovered over this whole 20 years, because I just completed my 13th feature, Specs. They're all Specs, except one was a writing assignment, a feature writing assignment. But all of them are Specs, because that's what you do. Unless you are a well-known writer who gets assignments, you are mostly going to be writing Specs that you put out, and hopefully someone wants to make it, or you can get a management or an agent that way. But most of the feature writing that you do isn't going to be on assignment. It's going to be just you wanting to tell a story, sitting down and finishing a feature. But one thing that I discovered is all of this stuff, all of the screenwriting books, all of the seminars, none of that really made me sort of understand screencraft as much as watching my favorite films and breaking them down. Most breakdowns that you hear about are story breakdowns. And I'll tell you, that's the best way to actually learn how to write a screenplay. Apart from formatting, but I think you guys mostly know about screenplay formatting. But actually understanding how a story is structured, why a scene exists, why a certain line was used. All this is done through breakdowns. And by breakdown, I mean putting your film onto a laptop and going scene by scene, rewinding, watching it, you know, like 7, 8, 9 times, and really breaking down the story into its parts. Because one thing that you don't really learn in screenwriting books, there's a few ones that are very popular, like Save the Cat. You'll never learn to write a great screenplay if you read Save the Cat. Save the Cat takes certain elements of story that exist in all films and breaks it down for you. That isn't as great as you sitting down and watching your favorite films and really breaking them down. You see what I'm saying? It's just a formula. Great films aren't formulaic. They're great designs, but the design comes from the writer. Let me give you an example. When I was at film school, I was invited to a dinner with Frank Pearson, one of the greatest screenwriters of all time. He wrote Dog Day Afternoon, Cool Hand Luke. He was the president of the WGA before he passed away. But at the meeting, I asked him, because in our screenwriting courses, they were talking about acts, you know, first act, second act, third act, and this is where the first act needs to end by page 25 or 30. So I asked him, I'm like, Mr. Pearson, when should a first act end? On what page? And he paused for a long time, and he looked at me. He's like, the first act ends where you decide it ends. It could end at page 50. You're in full control. There are no rules. But what these screenwriting books try to sort of pigeon you into thinking that I need to do it this way, or I need to outline, or I need to use note cards. Everybody comes, it's important also to learn your own discovery of your own process. Like with any art, it's really about understanding how you create is more important, sort of discovering your own voice, your own methods. And this is what I've done over the 20 years. I had to unlearn basically everything that I learned from the screenwriting books, from film school. And really the best, the best teacher for me have been my favorite films. And what I discovered is when I first watched these films, I was only getting about 10% or 20% of the film. But then I realized it took really like 20 years for me to go back and watch these films now with all the experience and knowledge that I've gained, to now I see 90% of them and they just blow me away after all this time. And so to me, that is, I think, just based on my experience. I mean, I'm not telling you not to go out and buy screenwriting books or Save the Cat or McKee's book or A Writer's Journey. Read them just to read them. You know, I read them, but to me, I think if you really want to be a craftsman in screenwriting, you need to watch your favorite films. Because either they were written by the director or they had their own screenwriter, but their approach, and I've gone to a lot of Q&As where the Coen brothers have never read Save the Cat. They don't espouse to any kind of screenwriting theory. They get an idea and they have a process and they talk it out. They sort of, because they write together, or, you know, anybody, Charlie Kaufman, his process to screenwriting is his own. It's his own thing that he discovered, but it doesn't match anything that you read in screenwriting books. Because really a story is about discovery. It's you have an idea and you start to explore that idea and you start to explore characters and you begin to think about the story. And it's, so there's really no formula that I think you can use. I think it all is different. Every story has its own way of telling itself. But you're the master, of course, as the storyteller. So you should be open to sort of allowing the story to go to places that it wants to go, but you have to be in control. And really, to me, I think allowing that process to happen by just writing as many scripts as you can. When I was doing the lecture at Pitzer, I asked how many people had written a feature. 0 hands went up. I will tell you this as just a cautionary tale, because if I had to do it all over again, if I knew I wanted to be a filmmaker, I would have never gone to high school. I would have started writing scripts, because you have to get the bad scripts out of you. I remember my first script was liberal arts. I wrote it right after college, and it was horrible. It was horrible, but I had to get it out. The next script, same thing. It was my writing didn't start to become good or even readable with people in the industry until my 7th or 8th feature. That's what started getting read. Because, you know, like I'd even, back then you used to send out queries. We can talk about this later on in the discussion about, okay, now I have a script. How do I get it out there? What are the possibilities? But anyway, I'm sorry if I'm rambling. But you have to start writing as soon as possible. I know Ryan said that, you know, he had to change majors because of his parents. You know, it's like, if you really truly want to be a filmmaker, Ryan, not to sort of disagree with your parents or whatever, but I would do less work in your major classes and pay more attention and focus to this, you know, to filmmaking, because every hour matters, every day matters. You have to put a lot of time in. You know, here I am, just to give you a little bit more a personal background. I'm on the precipice of possibly selling my first feature 20 years after film school. 20 years. And it's very rare that someone right away gets a film made. Most likely it's at the 12th, 13th script. You see, and it takes a lot of time. It takes about 6 to 7 months to write a feature. So just add it up. You see what I'm saying? So you want to start as soon as possible. And as good as working on short films is, and I would encourage you to work as much as possible making films, but really start to write features. It doesn't matter if they're not any good. You want to get those bad ones out as quickly as possible, but start writing now. It's daunting, you know, 105 pages, like, oh my God, am I going to be able to write that, you know, that many pages? You can. It's all about getting to the finish line, though. So, you know, it's all about the next page. It's all about sitting at the computer and writing every day. So I would encourage everyone in the club to immediately, as soon as possible, begin your first feature, finish that one, start the next one. And they don't, like I said, don't worry about whether they're good or not. That's not the point. It's about repetition. It's about writing. And every script, I promise you this, every script that you write, the next one is going to be better than the previous one. I guarantee it. Because that's just the way the writing process is. Anyway, so I guess I can open it up to questions. Just to getting back to that whole industry around industry. Like I said, back when I first started, the natural way to present your script to somebody, whether it's an agent or a production company, there was this thing called the Hollywood Creative Directory. And it came in a hard copy. and it had a listing of all the agents and all the agencies, the literary agencies, and all the literary managers, and all the production companies and film companies and studios, and the list of all the names of the people that worked there. And so you would send out query letters, introducing yourself and your project and asking if they would like to see a copy of your script for perusal. And this is how everyone did it. But then it changed. What ended up happening is with the onset of the internet, all these companies sort of decided to just team up with something called Project Greenlight. It's still around, and it's basically all of these companies, film companies that are part of the Greenlight sort of site, and you send them a pitch, but they charge you $30 per pitch. I think the way it works is the company involved gets a percentage of the profits. That's why I said there's a whole industry within an industry that preys on people trying to get in. And I just want to tell you, because it can get very expensive. Screenwriting competitions aren't cheap. Some of them, you pay $50, plus they tell you should get coverage with it, and that's another $200. So just to enter one competition with notes, with getting notes, is like $350 in some cases. And I'm not telling you not to do it. I'm just trying to save you guys money because you don't need to do that. My advice would be, if you really want a career in filmmaking, whether as a writer or a director or an editor or cinematographer, is right away to get an internship. I had two great internships. One when I was in film school at Davis Entertainment, which was on the Fox lot. And I was right in the action. I mean, these people made huge films, but I had to go back to film school to finish, which was a horrible decision. I should have just stayed at Davis Entertainment, because I was reading scripts, doing coverages for them. They liked me. I also did an internship after film school with Michael London, who did Sideways. And before then, when I was working with him, he was doing like 40 Days and 40 Nights, like really sort of Cineplex movies, until he sort of got into more sort of artistic, he started working with better filmmakers is what happened later on. But I was doing coverage for him and reading scripts and doing coverages, and he really liked me, but once again, I ended up leaving, which was a horrible mistake. So what I would recommend, just letting you know, like, how the best way to proceed is, even while you guys are in college, get an internship, either at a production company, or I would advise at one of the agencies, one of the 4 major agencies, CAA, William Morris Endeavor, Paradigm, Verve, one of the big 4. Because the way the industry works now is agencies run the movie industry because they package films. They take a script, they look down the roster, they add a director, they add whoever the actors are on their rosters, they put a package together, and then they sell it to a studio. That's how most films outside of the independent world are made. Independent filmmaking is 100 times harder to break into and to get a film made independently. I have a lot of my friends, a producer friend from film school, who told me, he's like, getting financing for an independent film is, 100,000 times harder to do than it is the way that Hollywood does it, which is packaging. Because it's just easier. You have the stars, you have the director, you have the script, and the package sells. So I would recommend very highly that you guys get an internship, either at a production company because everybody needs readers. They have tons of scripts and they need someone to read and do coverage, mostly, especially at the agencies. But you know, at the production companies, they'll have you do light clerical work and that kind of stuff. But the key is to develop relationships, because that's the most important thing. Is that if you're on the outside, then you have to go this whole route of Project Greenlight and submitting to screenwriting competitions. And even if you win, nothing might happen, you know, so you've spent all this money. You want to get in with people and develop relationships with people that are making films. Does that make sense? Because all of these people that are sort of doing commerce around the industry, they're just, you know, they're just offering their services, but it's not going to lead to anything. It's almost like playing the lottery. Whether it's like a screenwriting seminar, you have to pay $400 for it because they're like, I can give you the answers to what's going to make your screenplay sell. I mean, there's tons of these, you know, and you show up for, you know, an hour or two, and someone who has never sold a screenplay will try to tell you that they have the answers to what you need to sell a screenplay. The better route is to get an internship. Let whoever you're working for know that that's your aspiration. You know, that you're obviously you're not there to be an intern for life, that what you really want to do, how you see yourself 4 or 5 years in the future is that I want to be a screenwriter, I want to be a director. And then exhibit both your professionalism of showing up and doing good work, you know, like really showing. And then that way, once you've written screenplays, you could ask the agent that you're working for, you know, do you mind, can you read this for me? You know, and they will, believe me. You know, Michael London was always asking me, like, you know, do you have a script? Because he really liked my coverages. But by then, I'd only written those 2 horrible ones. And I was like, I don't want him to see these. But, you know, obviously, if I'd written more before then, I would have been like, yeah, of course, Michael here. And it would have been great because he's a producer, you see. So it's like, if he likes something, he already likes my work as a reader and a coverage person. So if I gave him a script to read and he liked it, he'd be like, yeah, I'm going to see if I can make this. You see what I'm saying? It's a much better route than to going to film school, spending another 3 years, doing things that you guys can practice. I tell Eddie all the time, you know, this shoots on 4K now. You can, if you have enough talent and skill, you can make a great film or even practice with editing software and your camera phone. So I would advise against film school, because I don't think you learn that much there. You practice a lot, but you can practice for free. You see what I'm saying? I'm only saying this because I got saddled with huge student loans. I just think there's a better route. And that route is getting your foot into the industry with an internship and starting to meet as many people as possible. Because if you get an internship at an agency, you're not just working for your own agent, you're meeting everybody at the agency. You're meeting everybody in the production company. They're sending you off, you know, to sort of do runs, you know, go give the script to so-and-so. And then you meet that person. So it's really about developing relationships. Because if you don't have them, they're very hard to develop. Nobody outside the industry, unless they're very low on the low rung, accepts unsolicited material. So it's like, even if you have a great script, they're like, we can't read it. Sorry, you don't have an agent, you don't have a manager. You see, I'm doing the Marvin Shores from you see from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But anyway, I don't want to keep talking. Let's open it up to ask me anything, and, you know, we can start a discussion. Because I wanted to tell Eddie, it's better. I think it's more valuable to you guys if we have a discussion about these things than just having me lecture about the process of screenwriting. Because, like I said, as far as the process go, read the screenwriting books, read them just for your own edification. But like I said, doing film breakdowns of films is the best way to really understand screenwriting. And then, of course, writing as well. But to me, if you want the education, break down your favorite films, break them down. That means watching them 10 times in a row, rewinding, going, why does this scene exist? Why does that line exist? How many people here have seen Uncut Gems? Nobody? Okay. How many people? What's one film you saw last year? Anybody?
I saw the other Safdie brothers movie, Good Time.
Oh, okay. Yeah, good times. Yeah, that too was just based on the idea of someone being paroled, and when you're paroled, they call it a good time because most the way that they're discussing is, as soon as someone gets paroled, they want to have a good time. But what the reason why I brought in Uncut Gems is because I don't want to give any spoilers for people that haven't seen it, but something shocking happens at the end of the film. But they actually tell you what's going to happen in the first 5 minutes of the film. That's good screenwriting. They don't highlight it, but it's there. You see, and that's why breaking films down, like let me give you an example. How many of you would think that Parasite, if I told you Parasite is the same movie as Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? You guys be like, wait a minute, how can that be? Both films are actually about class division. One, Bong Ho takes just society as the class divisions in society. Tarantino uses Hollywood to show us class division. But they're essentially the same movie. Both films are about capitalism. One takes place in the landscape of Hollywood. The other takes place in the landscape of South Korea. But they're both about capitalism and the class division, where you have different classes of people, and they're sort of fighting. Both films have huge violent endings. Of course, in Parasite, there's a more equitable death happening. In Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the poor people get killed, and of course, that's all to allow the property owner to, move forward and excel. But anyway, let's open it up to any kind of questions.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick. Owen just mentioned Paris, Texas, and I just watched that recently too. Yeah. I don't know if you want to mention too, because obviously, depending on taste and genre or something like that, but there's probably you consider conventional screenwriting and then unconventional, right? I mean,
well, to me, that's why I tell you to possibly be weary about these screenwriting books, because every story has its own structure. What Hollywood does with Cineplex films is, this is how every sort of Hollywood Cineplex movie, I'm talking about broad films now, whether they're comedy or drama or anything. You have some kind of inciting incident that they want to happen at page 10, between page 10 and, depending on the length of the film. If it's a 2-hour film, somewhere between 12 and 15 pages. This is how cookie cutter it is. And then that forces whoever is the main character to be confronted with something that they need to deal with, whatever it is. And then there's a midpoint in the story. Most midpoints in Hollywood structure is what's called a false victory. It's it's a high point. but that's only to have a low point at the end of the second act. They call it a brush with death. Usually that's what happens. Is it's in a love story, it's when the people break up and you think they're never going to get back together again. In an action movie, it's when whoever the main character is almost gets killed and is furthest from his goal. When we broke down Creed at the lecture at Pitzer, I showed how Michael B. Jordan's character, his low point happened when he was once again abandoned, because the story is about him sort of feeling abandonment from his own father, Creed, but then Rocky takes on a father figure like person in his life. But then once he learns that he has cancer and doesn't want to do anything, doesn't want to take treatment, Michael's character falls back in that same whole thing, and he just has a low point. He's has a huge fight with Rocky Balboa, breaks up with his girlfriend, and winds up in jail even. And has a huge emotional scene where he tells Rocky, "You're just abandoning me like my father," kind of thing. But that's the structure that they use. But like I said, every story, if you're wanting to do it unlike that, has its own sort of structure. You don't need to follow that structure. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be low or high moments in your stories. There should be. You want dynamic range, because that's what keeps people interested in watching. You see what I'm saying? It can't just just imagine a song if all you heard was the chorus, right? And there was no sort of verses. You'd be like, this is boring, So you want to sort of watch as many different films also just to see the different kind of structures that people use and how they tell story. I remember in the lecture, we had films that didn't even have 3-act structure, that just had 2 acts. For example, Full Metal Jacket is told in 2 parts. The first part happens in America at a training camp, at a military training camp. The second part happens in Vietnam. It's one of the greatest war movies ever. It's like it's so timeless that it's like you watch it and you see new things in it, because Kubrick isn't following any standard. He's trying to sort of examine what war and killing is about. That's why he starts in the military training. It's the drill sergeant tells him, like, my job is to turn you into killing machines. Try to make you take your, take a human and take all his human qualities away from him so he can just become a killing machine. But yeah, that's, but like Eddie was saying, there's 2 different sort of structures. One, which is most Hollywood Cineplex films follow a certain a narrative structure. And that's why I told you, like, Save the Cat, you can follow that structure, because that's what Save the Cat did. Save the Cat basically just broke down Hollywood cinema's Cineplex structure, and letting you know, like, these are the beats that you need that every Hollywood film has. I mean, that's true, but if you just write a story based on a beat sheet, no one's going to remember it 10 years. No one's going to remember it 6 months from now. Not even E.T. per se follows that kind of structure. You need, the story has to have depth beyond just a beat sheet. So like I said, really the best way to learn the craft is not only to write constantly getting as many features out as possible. But like Eddie's saying also, watch as many films as possible. The best thing that ever happened to me didn't happen at film school. It actually happened the year before I graduated from Pitzer. I took the history of cinema. I took some summer school courses at UCLA. One of them was the history of cinema. In this class, we saw every movie made all the way from the Great Train Robbery up to, I think, the late 70s, because the 70s was a very big time for cinema. You know, there was a lot of great directors that are working today that they were inspired by films of the 70s.
Yeah. Hey, Sam, real quick. There's a few students that might have to go to a class later, but do you want to take some quick rapid fire questions? Who wants to go first? Ryan, I know you have to leave pretty soon. Do you have any questions for Sam before you head out?
So you said that you wanted, or you said you had some thoughts on like whether or not I should pursue like a media studies major versus cognoscience, or was that more of like I should just like practice doing the like writing the stuff, because I want to go into producing more than like screenwriting. So how would you suggest?
Well, still with producing, I'm not telling you to not show up to your classes in your major and to get Fs. What I'm saying is that your focus, your entire focus has to become film. Otherwise, because there are just not enough hours in the day. If you're splitting your time between, I don't know how many courses you have, but you have all that coursework that you have to do. And so any free time that you have should be devoted entirely to watching films, and still, even with producing, writing. Because what does every producer needs? Material. He needs property. You can't have a film without a script. So you can either, as a producer, try to develop relationships with writers, but I would still, if you want to be a producer, get an internship at an agency or a studio or a film company. And still write your own scripts, Ryan. Because what that's going to do is, that's going to make you understand what a good script is. So when one comes across your desk as a producer, you'd be like, this is good material. Because there are a lot of producers that don't read scripts, that have never screen wrote before, but there are a few of them that are creative producers who start from the developing process with a writer, sit down and develop a script all the way through post-production. That's a rare breed, but I think that's the best type of producer. The one that is there from the beginning of the writing process all the way through post-production. So what I would advise, of course, finish Pitzer, finish your major, graduate, but spend as much of your free time, like I said, watching as many films, and especially watching your favorite films and breaking them down, breaking them apart. Like, the only way to learn something that's made is to break it apart into tiny pieces. And that's how you know how things fit. Because the best films are a design. It's a design, like the design of a house. So that's what I would even start now. I would even this summer, I would try to get an internship at the agency, or at a film production company or a studio. You don't have to wait until you graduated. Like, start, do it this summer, because you're a junior, right? Do one this summer, and then when you go back senior year, tell them, like, look, I'd like to come back when I finish my school year. I like to come back and finish my internship again. Because, like I said, it's all about developing that relationship. And you can only do that if you're there. So yeah, I definitely don't disappoint your parents, but like I said, it's all a time issue. You don't want to not have any scripts written, and then 5 years down the line, you're like, I want to be a producer, but how can I be? Like, I have a script by a great writer, but I don't have any contacts. I don't have any relationship within the industry. So it's really about also interning at one of the festivals also is a good way to meet a lot of people in the industry. Because at TIFF, at Toronto, at Telluride, at Sundance, I don't know if these festivals are still happening because of the virus. But once the virus goes away, interning at one of the festivals is another great way to meet a lot of producers, a lot of writers, a lot of directors, a lot of financiers. So it's really about developing those relationships, meeting people, and becoming sort of colleagues, essentially.
Does anyone else have any questions? Feel free to Jack.
Could you just talk a little bit about your process for starting a script, where inspiration comes from? And then once you've started, are you the kind of person who just, starts writing and then fixes it later? Or do you like to have a lot of preparation before you start writing a full feature?
Well, that's the thing. Like I mentioned with the whole screenwriting books, early on, I used to do the note cards. And it's not a bad way, but I found myself over the years that what I do now is something just strikes me. I don't know where an idea, it comes into my head. Like my Sam Cooke biopic, it just happened by listening to Live at the Harlem Square. I was like, oh my God, it literally changed my life. This live show that was recorded in 1963. And then I start to think about the people involved, the characters. And I don't really sit down and write anything until I feel like I have enough information to sit down and at least write a first draft. But that doesn't mean that I'm not, even while I'm writing, I'm not sort of thinking and note-taking. Because like I said, the most important thing about writing a feature, because a lot of people abandon it after 10, 20 pages. They're like, there's nothing more tragic than an unfinished script. You have to get to the end. Starting a feature script and quitting after 25 pages, you can't do that. But it's really about discovering your own process. And I think the best way to do that is to try different methods. Try outlining and see how that works for you. Try simply just free writing, just following the story wherever it goes, just like, and going back to it, maybe rehashing certain things. It's really, though, about discovering your own method over time. Really, that's what you're going to realize is that early on, you don't have a method. The method comes later as you try different things and you realize, oh, okay, this is the best way for me. I have a lot of screenwriting colleagues the same way. They all have their own methods. No one comes at it from the same way. Some of them write 50 pages of notes before they start a screenplay. Some of them just sit down, they get an idea and just jump in full force, start writing, and then go back and revise after the script is done. Usually with them, they go through 7-8 drafts before they feel that it's ready. For me, because I put so much time in learning just about the life and the world of the story of Black Icarus, I sat down and wrote it in 26 days, one draft, but it's like an 8th draft. Just because I put so much time in developing it that I knew everything that was going to go into the script even before I sat down to write. I'm not saying that's the best method or the way that you should use it. That's just over time, I've realized for me, the best way to approach it is just to sit with a story for as long as possible and just to talk about it in my head and just sit down and even too, also the reason why I tell you guys to watch as many films as possible, I can tell you this right now, and any great filmmaker will tell you this. If you're not stealing from your favorite films, you're not doing it properly. That's what everybody does. Just the other day, I saw Patty Chayefsky's, by the way, one of the greatest filmmakers that no one knows is Delbert Mann. This guy was a TV director who's won the Palme d'Or twice, which I consider always to be usually the best film in the world. They always, there hasn't been a Palme d'Or winner that hasn't been a great film. I mean, you go back through the titles. But I watched Marty and I saw that, oh my God, there's a scene in the movie where there's an action that Scorsese used for Goodfellas. And I'm like, Jesus Christ. So it's like, you want, the most important thing to do is to consume as much cinema as possible. And not just American films, British films, French films. Just now I've gotten around to the Japanese New Wave. And I've discovered that one of the greatest inspirations for Clockwork Orange, Kubrick's Clockwork Orange, was a very little known Japanese New Wave movie that was all centered in Tokyo. So ingesting as much film as possible from all over the world is another great method for screenwriting. You just want to be a sponge and take it. But like I said, in terms of actually learning how to write, the breakdown is the best way. And I always feel like using the films that inspired you and sort of wanted you to become a screenwriter or filmmaker is the best to break down, because you'll never get tired of wanting to learn more about what you're watching, because you like what you saw so much that you want to. It's like, well, wow, I really want to dive deep into this story, because, just to give an example, like I remember one of the films that wanted me to become a filmmaker was MASH. But I recently just saw it like this year, and there was like, I missed the entire movie basically. Like I saw it, what was interesting for me that it was subversive and, but there was so much about the film, like sort of visual commentary, sort of interesting character detail that I completely missed the first few times that I saw it. Now I saw it this year and like, I saw the film 90% for the first time. Because there's just so much in there. It's so layered that I just was seeing this much of it. And that's why I encourage you to rewatch the films that inspired you. Rewatch them many times so you can really see the film. Because with most movies, when we watch it, it's moving so fast, we're only getting sort of 10 or 20% of the movie. If it's really good, other movies you can sit and watch once and you don't need to see them again because they're not layered. You don't see something new each time you see. You've already seen it. It's a paint by the numbers type of movie. Hold on, let me turn on the light.
Yeah, does anyone else have a question just when Sam gets back?
Oh, sorry.
You can either type, Jack, you got to follow it. Go for it.
Unrelated, and stop me if this is rude or you have no intention of answering, but can I ask how you make money when scripts aren't getting picked up or when you don't have an assignment?
Well, how
that works?
Most like the last 20 years, I've been doing editing work. The one thing in just the whole world, the most jobs out there that are available to people are editors and videographers. And those are, you know, if you can do one of those things, there's just an abundance of work. Because, you know, producers usually don't want to edit or don't know how to edit, don't know how to use the platforms. And a lot of people don't know the technical aspects of a camera. Even though lately with sort of digital cameras like Reds and stuff, they're not as complicated as film cameras. Back then you had to load film in a bag blindly. You know, now you just insert a little SD card and you know, so it's, but that's what I've mostly been doing while I've been writing the specs, is mostly editing work, short form mostly, not any feature work.
And really quick, I just had for like people that are like now kind of the juices are flowing in terms of ideas, like if there was a first time screenwriter, what would you recommend? You know, because the advice is usually like write what you know kind of thing. Would you say like write something that's personal, you know, because you don't want to write like a science fiction movie set like in, you know, Jupiter or something like that, that's like, you know, kind of far-fetched, like in terms of actually getting this thing made, or like write something that you can actually potentially shoot?
Well, that all depends. I mean, to me, if you want to write something that you want to shoot yourself, I would try to write something as simple as possible, simply because, you know, having many locations, having many sort of characters in the movie, it's going to be much harder. But to me, writing what you know doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be better, you're going to have a better chance of selling it. Really, it comes down to execution. And really, none of that even matters. What I've realized over the 20 years of just writing scripts, I hate to say it, but anybody who's works in the industry will tell you, you need talent, but it comes down to luck. You can have the best script written. It needs the right eyes to see it at the right moment. So many companies over the years that I've written specs for that have read it, they go, oh, this is great, but it's not what we're looking for right now. You see what I'm saying? So that the timing wasn't right. Hold on, let me move, because it's getting dark in here. There
Does anyone want to jump into and ask any questions? Like, I know it's getting to like 1 hour. We're like a little bit over an hour, but just so we don't lose anybody.
Just to finish that.
Yeah, go for it.
That point. There is no way to sort of game increasing your chances of getting a spec sale. People will tell you this, like, you know, write to market, you know, like write a sci-fi or write horror because it's, you know, it's what everyone's looking for. Really, it comes down to the pair of eyes that are reading it. The execution needs to be there. You need to execute a script properly. And that's why I'm telling you, write as much as possible, because you got to get the bad scripts out as fast as possible. Your first feature, no one writes a great first feature. Even when a first feature gets made, that wasn't the first feature. That's their first feature that got made. You see what I'm saying? They'd written a bunch before then. So it's really about repetition, and but I don't think necessarily you should write what you know. I think sometimes it's good to get out of your comfort zone and to explore a world that you don't know, almost like a detective. I didn't know anything about 1950s gospel, you know, but I threw myself into that world, and it was very scary to write a biopic. I'd never written a biopic before. Prior to this, I'd written an action comedy, a dramedy, sort of like an indie dramedy, a road picture. So it's, I'm not telling you not to write something. It's always, every story should be personal. There should be something impelling you to want to spend all this time writing this story. There's got to be something that interests you, whether it's the character or the world. Something has to interest you, but it doesn't have to be autobiographical. What's more important is that you see something in the story that you identify with, that you want to pursue, knowing more about it.
Jamie, want to jump in with a question?
I had a question. So as a screenwriter, how do you deal with sort of like creative differences that you may have with like the director of your project? Because that's an issue that as a director I've run into before, is where, you know, there's like a certain scene and it's just playing out completely differently for two different people that are both equally important to the project.
Well, you know, I think every screenwriter should understand that it's a director's medium. You know, it's really the director's vision. Most good directors, if they didn't write the script themselves, will bring the writer into the process. That's very important. Just to understand the material, like what were you thinking when you wrote this line? What does it really mean? You know, or the scene, what is the scene really about? Because I'm kind of having trouble understanding. But there's always going to be creative differences. There's really nothing that you can do about that, because you know, you sort of see the material one way and the other person might be seeing it another way. But it's really what everybody in the industry understands, and I think you guys understand too, the last draft of the screenplay is in the editing process. So it's like, that's why I always encourage you guys to also, I know you can't do it on streaming sites because they don't make these available, but on DVDs, you see all the scenes that were deleted. And then if you watch them and you realize that's why they got rid of it. The scene works, it could be interesting, but why it didn't fit into the design of the film, whether it was for the pacing, they needed to drop it for the pacing, it was redundant possibly. When you write something on a page, it might not seem redundant, but when you shoot stuff and you start editing it, a scene might, you're like, oh, no, we get that already. We don't need this, right? So like I said, I think the best approach is to try to work it out, sort of give your reasons for why you disagree, and really sort of be open to what they're saying, but try to sort of, to me, I always feel like, let's just shoot it. And we'll see if it, once we get to the editing, whether it will work there. Because that's where it really needs to work. Because you guys both might be wrong. You know, so, but yeah, that's always going to be there. The way it is now, unfortunately, guys, films are now, this is very sad. But that's why I remember telling the students at Pitzer a few years ago, you guys really need to go against the current of what's happening right now. Films are made by committee, and you can't have art by committee. It doesn't, 12 people getting together, you know, 10 creative execs and a director and a writer can't get into a room and make a work of art. That's not how it works. Cinema art is a singular vision, first by the screenwriter and then by the director. And that's why there's such a sort of dearth of horrible films nowadays. Really, it's sad because it's made by a committee. You know, they're like, no, that's too offensive. One of the greatest, most important scenes, and this gets back to what I was telling you about watching a film that you loved or inspired you over and over again to really understand why a scene is important and why it's in the film to begin with. At a test screening for Goodfellas, Warner Brothers did for Goodfellas, the scene where Spider gets shot by Tommy, everybody in the audience hated it. They're like, I hate this scene. And so Warner Brothers executives were like, Scorsese, you gotta cut this scene out of the movie. He's like, are you kidding me? This is the most important scene in the movie. It's when someone like Henry, who used to fetch drinks for these mobsters, gets shot. It's allowing you to show you that these guys are not sort of fun-loving guys, but they're actually murderers, and they're sort of psychotic murderers. And what's more important, that everything in their lives goes downhill after that moment, because it just shows that this organization of what was happening with these younger mobsters, the older guys would have never done what Tommy would done, but because he was such a hothead, he did something unthinkable. And there's a beautiful moment in that scene where Henry, who used to be Spider, remember in the beginning of the movie, Henry used to be like Spider. He used to run around doing errands for these guys, getting them drinks. He's bent over Spider's dead body, holding his head. It's almost religious, the blocking. But that's the thing. Cinema's changed. Most of the producers and the people that work in the studios now that run production they're not film people. They're all business school grads from back east. And everything is data driven now with them. They're like, it's almost, I've talked to a lot of creative execs, and they use this phrasing. You'll hear this a lot. It doesn't check all the boxes. What the heck? What do you mean? What is that? That doesn't, it doesn't mean anything. This is just the way they think now, because it's a commodity to them. It's not, I know, I'm not sure how you guys see cinema, but for me, this is art. It's always been art. It's not people go and pay money to see it, but it's, at the end of the day, it's a work of art. It's not a commodity to just, where you go, it needs these pieces, otherwise we can't sell it. It's a lot of people will tell you too. It's like, I can't see the poster. Like, what does that have to do with anything? You see what I'm saying? You can't see the poster. What does that have to do with the story? Most posters now is just a big old face of the celebrity, the star. Posters back used to be beautiful. Used to just be sort of exhibit the theme of the movie in the poster, not just a face of the two stars that are in the movie, and then the title, So, but anyway, sorry to digress. It's just.
Yes, Sony, what do you think? One more question, and then.
If anyone has one, if not, then I think we're good.
Kristen's been so quiet. She hasn't said it. She hasn't said anything. But it's especially now with climate being such an important just thing in the world, the most important thing essentially. I think there's a lot of interesting stories that could be brought that have to do not necessarily like in a macro way about the climate crisis, but in a more detailed way. There was a great film. Has anyone seen The Last Reformed? No. Oh. It's about a priest, but it's really about the climate crisis.
Is that the Ethan Hawke one?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw it like last year.
Yeah.
Really good.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. There is there's so many great stories out there to be told. Unfortunately, the way Hollywood is approaching it now, which is, they're trying to do a paint by the numbers, kind of, and we know what the audience wants kind of thing. But really, it's about writing what inspires you, really something that captures your attention and you become passionate about and you want to express that. that's the most important thing. I mean, like for me, Black Icarus is not about a biopic about a black singer. It's about capitalism. It's about how capitalism has kept the African American community down. You know, there's a great speech that Sam has where this I took from Malcolm X, which is they allow a few people to come through and gain great success in order to make you think that everyone can have the success if you're an African American. But there's only a few. How many Beyoncés are in the world? How many Jamie Foxxes? There's millions of people that are in the African American community that will never become a Beyonce. But you know, it's a biopic of a gospel singer, but it's really about an allegory about the African American experience and how capitalism keeps the entire community down. So
really quick, can I share your email in case someone has any questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, share it right now.
In the chat, Owen has a question, and then maybe that will be our last question for the session.
He's only in the chat.
Yeah, let me read it. He just said, "What are your thoughts on financing your own projects? Do you think this method is preferable to trying to get your own script sold?"
It's one avenue. Let me. I'll go back to what my a producing buddy who is in the indie producing world, who's worked with Roger. He was Roger Corman's line producer at Roger Corman's company, who's the sort of known as the king of indie cinema. It's very hard. It could be a calling card to finance your own feature and do it, but you know, just because it plays at a festival doesn't mean that someone's going to go like, oh, do you have anything else? Or I want to make your next feature. Most indie features never see the light of day. They get made. They might end up on Amazon or some streaming site where they get rented by maybe 500-600 people for $3, and you never make your money back. But to me, I would focus more on, if you want to sort of do work, do more shorts. They're less expensive. You get the practice in. But what I would do is I would do what they call a proof of concept short of your feature script. So you've written a feature, then what you do is you self-finance shooting a scene or a sequence from that movie. And that will help you sort of try to get financing that way. So you have the completed feature, then you shoot a scene from your own financing that you've cobbled together, just to show the financier and the producers, like, look, this is the feature. I'm showing you that I can, you know, do the work as a director, because here's a scene or a sequence from the movie. It's called a proof of concept video. A lot of it's almost what you have to do now in the indie world before an indie financier will even give you the chance to do direct your own feature, is to exhibit, you know, to show them part of the film that you shoot yourself. So I think that would be the best approach. But like I said, just based on my own knowledge and my colleagues that are in the indie world, they're like, it's hard. It's even harder than the studio world. There's less money. It's very saturated. There's tons of indie movies, and they usually all wind up on streaming sites with the producers and the financiers, and even if it's your own budget that you came up with, then you never get your money back. So I would advise being careful. It's better to write a feature and then do a proof of concept and try to get somebody else to put up the money, a financier, than to try to, you know, use credit cards to try to make a $60,000-$70,000 feature using your own money. Sometimes they do work. You could be one of those lucky people, you know, that sort of, but it's very rare.
Yeah, just a closing thought, like, so we wrap it up. But yeah, I was just reading a biography on Francis Ford Coppola, and if you haven't seen his early films, you should definitely watch his stuff. I mean, they're amazing, and he's a great screenwriter too. But he considers himself
he started as a screenwriter.
Yeah, but he considers himself like as an artist, as a director, a gambler. So like if you have a gambler personality, he risks like all his own money to make some of these projects, and some of them paid off, some of them didn't. But you know, it's that personality too, right? Like if you're making art, do you use your own money, or do you wait to get some funding first, or do you get a grant? You know, it's just, I guess, personality-wise too, I guess, makes a huge factor. But yeah, if you have, you know, the gambling spirit, and you kind of go, I'm going to put my money on the line.
Yeah.
But, you know,
well, I mean, it's if you feel passionately about it, definitely do it. But there's no guarantee to it. Most of even with Apocalypse Now, where he had to use his own money because they had gone over production, they'd gone over schedule. By then, he'd made both Godfather movies. You see what I'm saying? He was already a known. It's like if I've made 2 Godfathers and I use my own money to make a film, there's going to be an audience for me. There's really no risk. There's risk because he's using his own money, but he has equity as a filmmaker, as opposed to being Joe Blow, who nobody knows, and gambling his own money because he doesn't have any equity. No one knows him as an artist.
Right.
I'm not telling you not to do it. I'm just saying if you do it, make sure that it doesn't bury you under incredible amount of debt. And because like I said, it's very saturated. The indie world is very saturated with features. Most of them never see the light of day. It's more important, I think, to execute your own craftsmanship with short films and feature writing, getting that to a very high level before you set out to make your first feature. I think that would improve your chances a lot. Sitting down and writing your first feature and using your own money, I would advise against it. You know, writing 10 features and then trying to make your first feature using your own money, I would say that's a better option, because then you know that you're really executing something.
No, that's great advice. So yeah, thank you, Sam, for taking the time out, and thanks everyone for.
I'm sorry if it wasn't as informative as as it could have been, but the most important thing, I'll say it again: shoot, edit, and write as much as possible. Write as many features. Shoot, edit. Just practice. Use as much of your time. I know you guys are in school, and I know you guys have your own courses and everything, but if you really want this to happen, it has to become your entire life. It has to. Richard Linklater spent 18 hours a day watching and talking about films when he was in college with his film associates. 18 hours out of a 24-hour day. So that's the kind of dedication that it takes in order for you to get there.
Well, thanks again, Sam, and thanks, Sony, for setting it up.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. I'm gonna